Great, thank you. So just briefly, what do we mean by qualitative data? So it's essentially data that is naturally occurring. So it doesn't need, it doesn't need producing in any kind of way. So it can be elicited by observation, by collecting case studies, by recording feedback. It's also open-ended in nature, so it's not something that gives you, quantitative data in the sense of, a number of people who've ticked yes to a certain question, or where you ask questions and give the different answer options. So they're open-ended, allowing people to choose what's most important for them to talk about, how they want to talk about, at what pace, and how they want to approach a subject. So it really gives ownership to the interviewees or to the participants. As a result of that, it's personalistic, so it really reflects person's different viewpoints, their experiences, their lived experiences, and it's usually in the form of narrative, and usually in the in the words of the person themselves. And then I'm just quickly going to touch on gathered versus generated qualitative data, and Lucy in her presentation is going to give you examples of both types. So gathered qualitative data is data that's already out there, and that could be through, for example, government research, research done by universities, by other charities, by independent researchers, and they make it available either freely or you have to register to access the data. So it's anything that is already out there that is accessible by the general public, and in recent years social media has become much more part of that pool of gathered data as well. So whether that's through data collected in Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, Twitter, so that counts more and more in as gathered qualitative data. And then you've got generated data, which is data that obviously you generate yourself, so data that isn't available yet, and that could be in a variety of different forms. So for example, easy things like a suggestions or comments box in your offices, all the way to running a focus group with a number of participants. So just briefly going through a few techniques in terms of generating data for qualitative research. So I think sort of the hallmark data collection tools are really interviewing. So that could be one-to-one or group interviewing. So you've got unstructured interviewing, where the principle is really that you get your interviewee on a subject of interest, and then you move out of the way and you let them tell their story, pick what's most significant for them, use the language that they're most comfortable with, and you kind of just lightly steer the interview to make sure it stays on track, it stays on the subject. Semi-structured interviewing combines a bit more of quantitative data as well, so it's often useful if you want to be able to compare responses across, for example, age groups or postcode areas. So you need to collect that kind of more quantitative data. But then similarly, it asks a number of quite open questions, and again, people have the opportunity to answer them based on their own experience. And you might, there's a lot of flexibility in semi-structured interviewing. So you can, if you figure out your interviewee knows quite a lot about one area, or brings up something completely new that you hadn't even thought about, you can follow that up in more detail, and you can kind of skim over questions where you think they don't know that much about it. I've just put structured interviewing on here because it's not a qualitative data collection tool. It's more quantitative because it is, your questionnaires, your surveys, so where you ask the same question to every person in exactly the same way. And then lastly, you've got focus groups. So where the idea is that you recruit, so they're not random groups, you recruit a number of people to discuss a subject of interest. And the discussion is really the core focus of this technique. So if you just wanted information, you would ask people one-to-one, but you're really interested in how does a group of people with different experiences, how do they approach a subject, how do they discuss it, how do they bring in their opinions, their different viewpoints. And then there are a variety of other methods. I mean, these are just a few examples. So diaries can be a really powerful source of qualitative data. So that could be written diaries, audio recordings, video recordings, just sort of anything that gives you that regular insight into a specific aspect of people's lives. Then visual methods such as sticky walls. So, for example, at the end of a workshop, or a community event, asking people to write down their answers to specific questions on Post-it notes. Obviously, there are digital equivalents as well with things like Jamboard, for example. And then social media, again, I think especially during the pandemic has become a really important data collection tool for a lot of charities, just giving them access to, sort of discussions on Facebook groups or again, WhatsApp groups. And then just lastly from me, a couple of thoughts on best practice. I mean, the sort of top recommendation is always to have an interview guide and test your questions. So always have, sort of a note of the kinds of questions that you want to tackle during an interview or a group discussion or any kind of other exercise. So just in terms of consistency and ensuring that, you kind of approach every interview scenario, every focus group in a similar way. And also test your questions just to make sure they're clear, that they're unambiguous, that you're not missing anything, that people are happy to, they understand the questions and they're happy to answer them. Then consider practicalities. I mean, for face-to-face, those are things like location, making sure it's accessible, timing, costs that interviewees might incur when they attend. Also language, do you need to think about having a bilingual interviewer, for example, but also, in terms of doing interviews online or over the phone, do people have access to a device where they can access, something like Zoom or any other platform, how digitally savvy are they? So just think of anything that might create a barrier for people to participate in the exercise, or that could, if you're inadvertently excluding people, create a bias in your data already before you've even started collecting it. And then obviously there are considerations around ethics. I mean, that's a big part of what we constantly have to think about as charities anyway. Do we do any harm with the activities that we're doing, the services we're providing? It's very similar in terms of qualitative research, and I think maybe even more so because people share their feelings, they share their lived experience with you, and they just want to know that you're keeping that data safe, that you're respecting that, what you're sharing with them. So, there's obviously a big focus on data protection as well, just making sure that data is kept safe. And then informed consent is, again, a big area to look into. We can share a template informed consent form with you after the learning lab, but just making sure that people upfront have all the information they need about, what it is it that you're interested in finding out, what are you going to ask them, how you're going to use the data, the whole sort of setup of the exercise, so just so that they can make an informed choice whether to take part or not. So if there are no questions at this point, then I'll hand you over to Lucy. So I'll stop sharing.
Hi everyone, I'm just going to set up my slides now. If there's any sort of issues with viewing these or access or whatever, just let us know in the chat. So just a little bit quickly about London Plus. So London Plus, we were formerly Greater London Volunteering, but we rebranded in 2018 to London Plus. Essentially what we do is we support the voluntary sector across London. We work mainly with infrastructural organisations, so CVSs, volunteer centres. We've recently opened up a social prescribing network. And my role at London Plus is to support those organisations with data and intelligence and kind of insight into what's happening in London, as well as also help them with their own data. I'm also a sociologist by background, so I've kind of got a best of both worlds in terms of my methodology training. So a bit of quantitative, like your lab yesterday, but what I really love is qualitative data. So I'm really looking forward to showing you what we've got prepared for you today. It should be quite fun. Okay. Oh, I'll just admit them. So what is qualitative data? Broadly sort of speaking, it's a series of analytical tools and techniques which help you gain a greater understanding of your textual data. And the main outcome of the process is the generation of empirical data, so patterns and themes. So it's quite simple, really. You have this kind of like textual data that you've either gathered or generated. And then this would be your analytical toolkit. And then depending on the output, depending on the tools that you choose, depends on the output that you get. So if you take a quantitative approach to analysing your text, so if you sort of count reoccurring words and phrases, you get outputs like word clouds, which are, you know, quite common. Or you might take a more kind of thematic approach, or, you know, sort of storytelling approach to what you've got. And the outputs of that, you know, sort of can be case studies, or perhaps, you know, video content for your website, marketing materials, that sort of thing. So yeah, two main approaches, the hard approach and the soft approach. I mean, I don't really like this distinction too much, not because one's harder than the other, but I guess the way that you treat the data, I suppose, is a lot harder. So, you know, you're really just kind of like digging away at what you've got, rather than kind of being kind of softer with it and kind of really reading into it as such. But I have also got slides on the hard approach, should anyone be interested in going down that route. It's quite helpful if you've got quite a lot of text, but I'll come on to that in a minute. So turning talking to data, so as Angela said, you know, there's qualitative data is one of these kind of naturally occurring things out there in the world. It might be already typed up for you, which is great in the context of kind of like feedback on TripAdvisor or you know, Facebook or something like that. But it can also be generated as well. So if you've observed something in the social world, you want to kind of get more of a handle on it, of course you can go out there and do your field work, so your interviews or your focus groups, and then from that you generate your text. So in order to kind of like tame this wild data that's out there, you use a process known as transcription. And there are various tools available for this. Otter is really great, very efficient at transcribing. It's got some free features, but it's also got some premium features. I really like it. You can use Dragon as well. It's you kind of dictate into the software, and it like types the text up for you. And then obviously, you know, everyone knows Microsoft Word really, but somewhere just to store your transcripts so that you can, you know, kind of make them malleable for your data analysis. So that's an example of a transcript that was generated by Otter. But similarly, you know, this is one I typed up in Word for my master's thesis. And as you can see, qualitative data is actually quite large. So for an hour and 45 minutes of talk, you've got nearly 16,000 words. So it's quite a lot of data there to actually get through. Anyway, so if you've got a lot of data and you want to get through it, you can use a few quick fixes. So SurveyMonkey, for example, if you've put out a survey and you've got, for example, some feedback on that survey, it will do a quantitative analysis basically and generate a word cloud for you, so you can see, like, you know, the key themes there. Mentimeter is a really good one as well. I'm sure with Zoom being so popular as well, Mentimeter's probably kind of surged in popularity. You know, if you can actually ask your audience a question in real time, so you can actually generate some qualitative data there, and you can, you know, set it to like one-word answers and stuff like that, so it filters it out for you. Oh, I can see a lot of activity going on in the chat. Is everything okay? Can people hear me and everything? Yep.
Yeah, don't worry, Lucy. We're just
yeah, cool. Okay, great. Yeah, Otter is another one as well. So not only will Otter transcribe things for you, but if you've got a premium account, it will also generate word clouds for you. And it's also got a sentiment analysis feature, so it kind of tells you whether the responses or whatever that you've had is kind of you know, like largely positive or negative, which can also be quite useful. So why should I code my qualitative data? I'm going to give everyone a minute to just take a look at this one. Okay, so hopefully you've all kind of skimmed that by now. So this is a word cloud that I generated based on literally just feeding that piece of text into a software called Atlas TI. And as you can see, doesn't quite make sense. And the reason for that is obviously because the reviewer has used the term not interesting, but the code behind the word cloud isn't smart enough to detect that basically what she was saying was negative. So you end up with confusing information like this: crowded, boring. Oh, but it was an interesting tour. So one thing that's really important when you're thinking about qualitative data is it can't be treated in the same way as, say, numbers. You know, qualitative data always has a context, and a lot of the time that context kind of ends up breaking the robot, if you like. So the kind of code behind these word clouds and things like that, it's not smart enough to read the context. So hence we move on to the soft approach. So this is the main way of kind of coding your qualitative data. It's known as deep reading of the data. It requires an attention to detail and also the ability to read beyond the text, i.e., you know, ascertain the context of something. Things that you also might look for could include use of emotive language, one-word answers, pauses, pitch, tone. Again, more contextual features, so like use of sarcasm, expletives. Again, kind of just think about, I don't know, R2D2. He's not really going to understand maybe sarcasm or expletives, right? So it's just those kind of human elements of qualitative data that you really look out for when you're using a soft approach. And I like to think of it a little bit as like weaving. So if you think of these kind of things that you're looking for, so say that the use of emotive language or expletives or sarcasm or one-word answers as kind of the threads that run through your data set, right, your textual data set. And actually the process of analysing data in this way is that you, by picking up those different threads, you kind of bring them together to paint a picture or to kind of like sew a tapestry, if you like. So these different components come together to form an overall picture of the actual context of the data and the story that you're trying to tell with it. So the tools that you would use for this, you know, you examine the meanings of what's there, as we previously discussed. And when you do this, you apply interpretive labels to these things as you find them. And these are known as codes. So completely different thing from, like, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg, right? This is not the same. It's just applying basically a label to something that you found. And then by identifying and accumulating these labels, you then go on to identify emergent themes within the data. And for any kind of academics out there, this is known as the grounded method. So it happens in 3 stages. You've got the first order code, so what was literally said. Second order codes, what that means. And then the third order or group, code groups. Basically, you combine this, so your first order codes with your second order codes, and then you can start to draw out the main themes in the piece. So yeah, you can see it's not like quantitative data analysis at all, which tends to be quite a linear process. I mean, there might be a lot of learning on the way and revisions, but it tends to be quite linear. Whereas in this case, you can clearly see this is actually the academic model for grounded theory. You can see there's a lot of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until you reach a point of saturation, which I'll come to right at the end. So let's see what this looks like in practice. So you can see in this case, they want to find out, why do people turn vegan? They've got their interview transcripts. They've got quotes and paragraphs that they've picked out of these transcripts. And then they've got the first order codes. So they've picked up animal rights. As you know, these are the verbatim things that people have said, literally word for word. Animal rights, other people, hipsters, they just seem to be everywhere. A hipster trend and a health trend. And then from this, they're then able to kind of group those together to draw out the second order codes. And they've reached a point of saturation here. They don't need to kind of go any further. But you can see that they've found, you know, people do it for ethical reasons, or they do it because they want to look like a hipster. So here's the interview. The review. There we go. I've got interviews on my mind. This is the review from earlier, and this is how I coded it. So you can see I've picked out first order codes: boring, crowded, long lines everywhere, audio, it was dull, no more informative, wasted 3 hours, guided tour, 200 people in each group, really? And then I've brought this together kind of in my code book. So I've got my first order codes, and then I've grouped those thematically. What's the context here for boring? Audio guide, dull, not informative. It's uninformative audio guides. 200 people in a group, crowded, long lines. That's clearly about oversubscribed tours. And then, kind of long lines everywhere, queuing, wasted 3 hours, time-consuming visits. And then this is the themes. So in this context, it's kind of perhaps things that if you, I don't know, were running this attraction that you'd consider as actions to improve it. So I've got information resources from uninformative audio guides, capacity issues, obviously relating to oversubscribed tours, and a time-consuming visit relating to kind of like the, time and duration of the visit. So we're going to move on to the pilot exercise in a minute, but before we do that, I'm going to play you a video. I'm just going to set the screen up for sound. Just so you know, this is a recording, so he isn't meant to move or anything. It's not like a video, it's kind of like a audio bite. So I'm just going to share it now, but if there's any issues with sound, please do let me know.
So you mentioned that you're not the answer. So how do you deal with issues that perhaps, like self-harming, are perhaps not part of your program?
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, lots of the time we have referrals from professionals, family support workers and social workers in the area, and there are issues within the family. So it's really our role as man and boy to liaise with them and to find what's the most appropriate thing for them, and to be supported by them. That's part of the reason why we have referrals, is so that if a boy is referred to us, we've got that professional behind the scenes also encouraging and supporting the family whilst they go through the programme. So if we do have any issues, we can have a discussion with the professional and see where perhaps we can signpost the boy and the man to if they need it. And we've done that quite a few times. So I guess that's how we deal with when there's serious issues arise. Then we've always got that fallback and to discuss where to take the issue, obviously with the consent of the family.
What has been the demand for services? Are you oversubscribed?
That's a good question. Are we oversubscribed? And often we're not oversubscribed, which is often a surprise to us. Partly, I think it's trying to get the word out to the local professionals. And it's a bit like a colander that you fill up with water and it just drips out. And so you have to keep reminding busy people that we exist and that you can refer to us, especially schools who think it's a great idea, but obviously they're busy with their classes and other things, so we're another thing to think about. We've tried to make the referral process as straightforward and as simple as possible, but it still does take quite a lot of effort from our part to keep reminding, especially schools, but also other people, social workers, etc., that they can refer to us. So I guess there is demand, but we need the referrals from the professionals. We can't just go out and seek people. So it's our role to try and keep in touch with the network of professionals that we have by email or by phone, and just to keep reminding them that we exist.
What are some of the challenges that your organisation faces?
Like any charity, I guess we face the financial challenge, but more so, we face the challenge of finding the referrals. There are many boys out there that could do with our support, but as I've said before, we need the professionals to refer them to us for us to then engage with them. That's probably our major challenge, is to continue to engage with referrers so that they know we exist and that they will refer to us. Apart from that, I think as we grow, then the other challenge will be supporters and helpers and volunteers, keeping them interested in doing this year on year. So our challenge is to keep on topping that pool up as well with new people who are interested in helping man and boy on an annual basis.
Great. So hopefully you all were able to hear that okay. I couldn't see anything in the chat, so I'm going to presume that you did. So that's an example of a interview conducted by an organisation called Man and Boy, and they've actually kind of turned that into some marketing and kind of like case study really for their website. I ran it through a word cloud out of interest just to see, because obviously the issues and challenges that they face as an organisation are quite complex, whether our robot, whether R2D2 would be able to pick up on the kind of nuances of what was discussed. As you can see, I mean, not too bad really, but a little bit ambiguous to say the least. So what did the word cloud miss? Oversubscribed, that's just wrong. I mean, as we all heard, he said, you know, actually surprisingly, they're not oversubscribed. What they've actually got is an issue with referrals, right? So actually they want more referrals. So they're not actually oversubscribed as a charity, despite, you know, obviously there being a lot of young boys in need that need their help. And also professionals. So obviously these people are, you know, absolute professionals, but it doesn't really tell us what the context professional, the context of the word professionals. So again, in the actual context of the interview, he's talking about actually referrals and reaching those health professionals and education professionals that can refer beneficiaries through to Man and Boy. So yeah, just again, as you can see, word clouds are useful, but they don't, you know, you can't really ascertain the full context of these kind of complicated things that are going on and these kind of issues that that charities like this are facing. So time for the pilot exercise. You'll be working with the transcript from Man and Boy. Angela, have you got the link I sent you to the Jamboard? If not, I can pop it in the chat for everyone. Oops.
Can you
Okay.
put it in the, and yeah, great.
Yep, great. So if everyone could just click on the link, I can see people, somebody's a unicorn today, that's great. A chinchilla, oh, I love those, they're so cute. So some of you may have used Google Jamboard before, if not, no worries. Oh, hello, giraffe. So we've got, it's pretty much, it reminds me a little bit of MS Paint. We've got 2 slides today on Jamboard. So we've got the transcript from the Man and Boy interview, and then we've got a little table here with our first order codes, our second order codes, and our main themes. What I want you to do is put a sticky note under each. So for example, I'm going to talk about, say, referrals. That's something that came up. And then I'm going to put my second order code. So I'm going to say referral pathways, because this is the kind of context of it. And then I might say, you know, what's the main theme here? Perhaps it's, I don't know, structures. Okay, so it's pretty simple. You just want to pick out your first order codes, so the things that have said verbatim in this extract, the context of those, and any kind of main themes, or if it's any easier for you, kind of think about if you were Man and Boy, what are the kind of main actions that you would take based on the interview. So would you look to improve particular things, and then list those under your main themes. So I'll give you until about, should we say 20 past, so that's about 9 minutes. Do feel free, if you've got any questions, to ask us for help. But yeah, just go ahead, get stuck in, enjoy.
Lucy, for maybe some of us who haven't used Jamboard before, can you just quickly show how to? Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course, sorry. So the sticky note buttons here, and then I've color coded it, so you can just change the colors here. So I've done yellow for first order, green for second order, and blue for third order. So you literally just type your thing there, click save, and it will appear, and then you can just drag and drop it.
Can I just ask, how do we see the transcript slide?
Yeah, sure. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so at the top, if you just click previous, the arrow button, and it will take you to the previous slide.
Oh, okay.
And then the transcript is here. But one thing I should mention is you can use pens as well. So if there's anything you want to highlight or underline, feel free to do that. You won't disrupt the text or anything. I can see some really great stuff coming through already. This is brilliant.
No, I can't navigate to the transcript page.
Oh, okay. So it won't let you click the arrow at the top.
No, they're not live when I click on them.
Oh, okay. That's strange. Hang on a sec. Oh. If I resend the link, will that be helpful?
Try again.
Yeah, if you try again, yeah.
Ah, looks different now.
Yep, that's good. If there are any issues though, just pop your answers in the chat as well. I should have mentioned that to everybody. If you do have issues with access, just pop your answers in the chat for us. Yep, networks is definitely a good one. I think possibly better term than I use, structures. I quite like the term networks, so yeah, that's great. We've got signposting, yep, definitely. Oh, somebody's post-its down the bottom there. I'm just going to move it so we can see. Great, so we've got the professionals come up again, yep. And already you can kind of like draw out the context of that a bit more just from using this approach. So you can see how useful this is when we've got kind of complex data. Many boys could do with help. That's a really good one. So we got a lot of first order stuff, which is brilliant. I just wonder in the last 3 minutes if we could try and flesh that out a bit. So maybe have a look at the second order codes and main themes that we can get from our first order codes. Great, that is looking really fantastic. Cool. So I think we've reached a point now. We could possibly keep going, but I think this has shaped up really, really nicely. We seem to have had some themes that we can really draw out of this. But hopefully, the purpose of this exercise really was just to show you actually, you know, from such a short interview, actually how much depth of data is there, and by kind of coding it in this way, you get a lot more out of it than say just generating a word cloud. So I'm a little bit aware of the timing at the moment, just because we've got another exercise to get through. So I'm just going to move on to that. If anyone needs a bathroom break or anything, please don't suffer in silence. You can take it. But I'm just gonna move on to the main exercise now. Okay, so now that we've done our pilot exercise, we're prepared to get on and do our main exercise. So I've come up with a little scenario. The data we're going to be using, by the way, is real. So these are actually real TripAdvisor reviews. So this is our gathered data. So what is our scenario? We work for Visit London and we're conducting an annual review of how well attractions across the city are performing. The marketing team have recently sent out a survey through the newsletter, and they've had a good response rate. So quantitative data, it's been signed off, but the data doesn't quite make sense. For the first time, 3 popular attractions have performed badly with little explanation as to why. So this is a case where the quantitative data isn't really giving us the full picture, and we need to delve a little bit deeper into what we've got. So because you've been to the Learning Lab today, you and your team have been tasked with solving the mystery. So you've got a hunch that leads you to TripAdvisor, and you're going to have a look at the reviews that have been left. So you put these pieces of gathered data together in a little database, and what you're looking to do in your teams is map out the lived experience of a London sightseer. So you want to not only find out what's gone wrong, but also what's gone well. So what makes an attraction perform well. So this is Excel, but for the purpose of kind of everyone being able to have access today, you'll be working with Google Sheets. It's very, very similar to Excel, but it's you can share the sheet basically in a group and everyone can access it in real time and fill it in. So you're going to have your data will be here, and there'll be an example that one I made earlier at the top for you, but then there'll also be the actual reviews will be in the review column. So this is your data, and then you'll have different columns for your codes. You have your first order codes, your second order codes, and your main themes. And they'll be here. So when same as you've done with the Jamboard exercise, you're going to just kind of skim the review, because some of them are quite lengthy. pick out the first order code, so verbatim, you know, what they said, second order codes, what this meant, and then any kind of main themes. So what are the main points that you can draw out of this review? And yeah, there's the little owl in his dressing gown, just a bit creepy, but anyway. So understanding the lived experience of a London sightseer, a few things to consider whilst you're coding. Obviously, you want to look for those negatives and positives so that you've got a balanced view of what's going on there. And the data that I've selected for you is a bit of a mixed bag. So you've got some really bad reviews and also some neutral reviews and then some good reviews there. The case, so when you're looking at your qualitative data, what kind of case is it? Basically, do you trust what they're saying? Is this what a normal person would say, or is this a bit wacky? And you will see that some of the reviews are, yeah, a bit quirky, but try not to get too distracted by them if you can. Finally, food for thought. So has the review made you aware of something you hadn't previously considered? So any unusual or unique points that you think are worth highlighting, make sure that you pick those out and jot them down. And also any reoccurrent themes. So as a group, you want to kind of look at the reviews as a corpus of text. So if you do your, say, if you broke the reviews up between you did a review each, try and find just 2 or 3 minutes to reconvene at the end of the exercise, just so you kind of know what kind of main themes are coming out of the collection of reviews for that particular.
She's just popped away for a minute. She'll be back.
Okay, I hope you found that useful. I think in my group it was with some of the reviews, you know, sometimes it's just hard to find the sort of second order codes and to summarize something. So if once you've identified the your first order code, sometimes it just, you know, it's a bit harder to come up with the second order codes, especially if the reviews are quite short and you don't have a lot of information to go on. But hopefully you had some time in the groups also to sort of compare and see how maybe, you know, you came up with similar themes but had very different opinions about it. Like I think in my group we had Buckingham Palace, and so Priya had some reviews that said, you know, building is in a poor state and it needs a lick of paint and the curtains need washing, that sort of thing. Whereas in the reviews that I was reading, it said, you know, really well maintained, and yeah, okay, you know, some curtains are a bit threadbare, but generally really well maintained and, you know, looking great. So it's just sort of, you know, having both sides of the story when it comes to particular themes, and so you've got, you know, the whole spectrum of opinions. Yeah.
Hello.
You.
Sorry, I disappeared, everyone. Okay, so hopefully everyone got on with that fairly well. No worries if you didn't finish the exercise completely. I was used to kind of running these in person before, and people had a lot more time. So it doesn't matter. Because we're kind of running out of time a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you XMind very briefly. Which is a tool that you can use. So when you're coding your qualitative data, XMind is quite a nice mind mapping tool just to kind of mind map the themes that you've got. So I've got a template for you based on the TripAdvisor exercise. I'm not going to go through it today, just because as a group we don't really have the time. But as you can see, you've got each of the different exercises, so Tower of London, British Museum, Buckingham Palace. And then for each you've got the negatives, positives, and any kind of interesting points. And what you do is you fill these out, so you populate this. And then you kind of look, it helps you to really visualize it. If you're a visual learner like me, it helps you to really kind of visualize it holistically. And then you're able to kind of draw out the broader negatives and positives for all of these attractions, and turn them into recommended actions for improvement. So this is one that the Volunteer Centre Network did. Oh, if I can load it. Or maybe not. Let's see. Okay. No. Oops. Nobody look at my folder whilst I see if I can get it. It is definitely in there. Yay, here it is. So as you can see, this is what the Volunteer Centre Network worked on London Plus when we ran this exercise with them back in February. So you can see positives and negatives that have been drawn out of each of these. The Schrodinger's beefeater thing came from the Tower of London review, so I don't know which group were working on that, but you can see that there were a lot of mixed reviews about the beefeaters. So some people had said they were incredibly nice beefeaters, and some people had said they were incredibly rude beefeaters. So that was an interesting point that we picked out of that. Again, for the British Museum, positives and negatives, seemed like there was issues with kind of capacity. And then the positives, obviously, lots of knowledge on display. Interesting points. One of the reviewers had said that they really liked the British Museum. It was one of their favourite places, along with some sort of concrete museum based somewhere. So don't really. And somebody else said they loved the gift shop. It was a bit like something you get at Disney. And then Buckingham Palace, again, kind of issues with oversubscription and not being open for 12 months a year. And then positives, obviously the royals and history. And then a reviewer had said something about the Queen's curtains being really like mucky looking, which was quite interesting. But yeah, we drew this out into broader negatives and positives. So as you can see, lots of crowds, long waits, staff conduct and skills not being particularly good. And then the positives were all the gift shops, if there are gift shops, seem to be amazing at these places. They do a really good job of showcasing the history, and there's a lot of educational resources. So then as a group, we kind of thought about, if we were, at Visit London, what kind of recommended actions for improvement would we come up with? And that was staff training. I think that was particularly important for the rude beefeaters. So, welcoming people, crowd control, engaging people. We also had to think about oversubscription, possibly ways of reducing long queues, and expectation management as well, because if you guys did, manage to take a look at these reviews, you would have seen that there seemed to have been a bit of a disconnect between, tourists' expectations of what they were going to get. Like, I think somebody on the Buckingham Palace said they were really upset they didn't get to go and say hello to the Queen. Clearly that sort of thing is not going to happen. So just kind of making sure that, these attractions aren't being oversold to avoid disappointment. So very quickly, just in the final 10 minutes. So just to recap then, so why do we code? Well, it enables us to draw out themes in a systematic way, as hopefully you would have seen from the Jamboard and also the TripAdvisor and XMind exercises. By attaching codes to extracts of text, you can put these threads, you can weave these threads together to craft a tapestry, right? So to really tell a story, and actually looking at those TripAdvisor reviews, it's definitely some good material there for a story, especially the woman that showed up in a Tudor gown and apparently got chased by a beefeater at the Tower of London. But yeah, in all seriousness, it helps you to kind of like put a tag. Actually, some qualitative data analysis software enables you to tag particular quotes that you might want to use. So if you're putting together a case study or something like that, it can be really, really useful. However, as you can see from the exercises, it takes a very long time to do. And in the case of TripAdvisor, going through all of the reviews for, say, Buckingham Palace was just, you just wouldn't be able to do it in that way. There's definitely a lot of reviews. I think at the time there was something like 45,000 reviews and counting. So yeah, obviously when you are doing your qualitative analysis, you need to really think about your sampling, which is what I'll just move on to. Yeah, so a very quick note on sampling. So unlike quantitative data analysis, there's no standard for sampling with qualitative data per se. So some of you are quite familiar with quant will know that you need a particular sample size in order to make inferences. So if you're working with a sample and you want to talk about a general population, you need a particular type of sample. It needs to reflect that kind of broader population that you want to talk about. Lots of difficult equations involved with weighting and so on and so forth. Qualitative analysis really isn't like that. The sample that you select should be grounded in the context of your question. So if you think about man and boy, for example, that's just one interview, but obviously it's a very in-depth interview for the 3 minutes or so. Obviously, because the guy that they're interviewing, he might be a caseworker or something, but he has a really good understanding of the issues and challenges faced by the organisation. So selecting your case, again, you know, if you want to interview someone about a complex problem, you know, you choose someone who is knowledgeable, or a group of people who are very knowledgeable on that subject. Or if you want to understand a service user or something, you know, you'd pick a handful, say, of service users or beneficiaries who you know have been through the system and have had, you know, different experiences of it, so positive, negative, so on and so forth. So where quantitative data seeks to make inferences, as I said earlier, to the whole population, qualitative data is always going to be case specific. So your data, again, will always speak for a specific case of something, which means you can't make claims about the whole population. So you can't, I mean, it's quite, you know, intuitive, and everyone kind of knows that if you interview about 5 people, you can't say, well, you know, we have 100 beneficiaries, we interviewed 5 and we kind of know what all of those 100 beneficiaries think now. Like, doesn't kind of work like that. So when you are thinking about sampling, again, you should always think of, well, what's my data a case of? So again, that's, you know, if you do interview, I don't know, 5 beneficiaries, you know, choosing a kind of a diverse range of people, maybe people different gender, race, sexual orientation, and also kind of what kind of experiences they've had of the service as well. So you know, whether they've had positive or negative, and you can do that through, you know, like your surveys and feedback forms and stuff. You can actually sample people based on the responses they give, if you've got a tick box to say sign up for further research, you can kind of like just recruit your participants from there. And if you have a large corpus of text, so actually in the context of COVID, WhatsApp and Facebook and stuff has been quite a popular data source, also I'm told, for some small kind of frontline organisations. You can sample for a particular range suited to your research question. So for example, in the context of the TripAdvisor exercise, you know, if we really wanted to know about, you know, the really bad reviews on these attractions, we can filter for terrible reviews on TripAdvisor, and then we can look at them most recently. So if things have gone downhill over the past 3 months or 6 months, we can filter for that period. So very quickly on reaching a saturation point, because I did say I was going to come back to this. So this is basically an academic explanation of saturation. Basically, you stop when you no longer need to continue, but the challenge, of course, is knowing, well, when does that need no longer exist? And actually, you do this by a process of reading the data and comparing your findings. So taking that holistic approach to your text, looking at, say, those different reviews and seeing if there's anything else that you can draw out from it. And basically, the idea is through that process of comparison, when you start coming across the same emergent themes, so you can draw a pattern out of them, like I showed you with the TripAdvisor, where we were able to draw out the negatives and positives and kind of turn those into recommendations for improvement. When you can get to that point, then you know that really you've reached a point of saturation, and there's probably not much point of going through any more extracts. So I came up with a checklist. These are just generic points that you might consider when you feel like you've reached the end point in the coding. So are the same patterns, i.e. words and phrases and themes recurrent across my corpus of text? So that's not one interview, that's several interviews or several reviews or whatever pieces of text that you've got. Have I managed to generate any new or unanticipated codes that were not obvious to me before analysis? So if the exercise has really generated some food for thought for you, then you're probably going in the right direction towards reaching a point of saturation. And then examine the codes and themes that you've generated. So are they cohesive? Do they tell a story? So again, think about your research question, and your data is a case of that research question. So do you have enough enough data to basically tell a story about that question or to answer that question. Yeah, and again, yeah, does my data answer my initial question? And another final point is if your research kind of warrants further inquiry. So if you've found something really interesting out and then you think, I wonder if that might apply in, say, another case. So what I've found might apply to, say, a similar charity who works with similar kind of groups that I work with, then that's a really good sign that you've done good work. But yeah, just like SpongeBob when he kind of like sucks up all the water, you know, there's only so much qualitative data and kind of like information you can get from a piece of text that you've got. So yeah, like, don't sweat it if you feel like you've reached a point where actually the same things are coming up and you can't do it anymore, then trust your gut. You're probably right with that. So just very quickly, the vegetable patch analogy. So obviously qualitative data analysis does take a long time. One of the things that you can actually do is use your quick fixes like your word clouds or even some of the kind of more advanced text mining stuff in the hard approach in conjunction with your thematic analysis, and actually that is quite a nice sweet spot. So I like to think of it as a vegetable patch analogy. So you've got your quick fixes, they're useful. So this is your word clouds and stuff like that, useful for taking stock of what's there, provides you with a breakdown of what's there. So it tells you, you know, if you're thinking about a veggie patch, you know, how many seeds you've sown, quality of the soil. So basically the patterns that you've got in a piece of text. So that's the kind of stuff on the surface. And then the grounded method of it, or your soft approach, obviously shows you the kind of stuff that's underneath the soil, right? So, you know, you're really digging deep into that data and extracting the narrative of the story. So what's concealed beneath the hard surface? So that's your text, right? Like your strings and your patterns. Allows for a deeper understanding of emergent themes, including hidden nuances. So, say for example, you've got these veggies that you've planted, you know, not all the veggies are going to taste the same. There's like a bit of variety there. So yeah, using the grounded method helps you kind of dig up those interesting kind of tidbits of information that kind of give color to the story that you're trying to tell. And finally, it enables you to be open to surprises, so unexpected themes and findings. So anything that you might not have bargained for as well can crop up when you're reading the text in this way. Final thoughts then. So it's a quote from Lady Windermere's fan. Basically, you know, the cynic, Lord Darlington, he says, you know, a cynic is a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. And then Cecil says, and a sentimentalist is the man who sees an absurd value in everything and doesn't know the market price of a single thing. So it's like, basically, you don't want to be too one way or another. So you don't want to be completely quant when it comes to your textual data, because you might miss a lot of things. But similarly, you know, if you're going down the grounded route, you might get lost in a rabbit hole, right? And it might take you a very long time. So it's just kind of balancing those two approaches out, kind of your quick fixes, your word clouds. Bit of text mining is absolutely fine when you've got a large body of text, but similarly, like, you know, you also don't want to miss the content, what's there. You don't want to know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And that's me done for today. We've got a Q&A, I think, very briefly, if anyone's got questions. But yeah.
Yeah, and we were